guys, it's Dave, it's Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Boston, Massachusetts-based modern metal powerhouse, The Offering. The band's new album, Seeing the Elephant, will be released on November 4th via Century Media Records. This is album number 2 from The Offering, and another album that was primarily written during the pandemic and lockdowns. But some of it was fueled by that and things that happened during that time. Seeing the Elephant is an album of extremes, says vocalist, lyricist Alexander Riccici, I think.
Does that work? Come in.
I'll just call him Alexander. From its inception in 2020, I was overwhelmed by the innate need to express what we are: complex people in a complicated space, with a distrust of humanity, authority, and their ability to cope with unprecedented times. While battling with a very metaphysical events in 2020, I watched the empathetic eyes of my loved ones fill with more fear and anguish every day. I was numbly overcome with rage and put myself in harm's way to indulge in the suffering of the current situation, to fight for what I believe was and is just. Seeing the Elephant is a glimpse into the perils of our time, what is and should be righted in society, a reflection of what should no longer be tolerated. Guitarist Nishad George said, finishing this album was honestly the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. There was this sense of momentum, releasing Home, touring, working with Body Count, then suddenly it's all gone. On top of losing that from the start of making the album in 2020, my dad began to lose his battle with cancer, which is why I set out to do this. So with all that happening, all that uncertainty and loss of purpose, I surrendered to the fact that I couldn't control the world and coped by making this album with my gang as best I could. We finished the album a week before my dad passed away, not before he could listen to it. He told me it was the greatest album he'd ever heard from me. I think so too. Seeing the Elephant was recorded by Nishad at God City Studios in Salem, Massachusetts. Engineers Zach Weeks and Tyler Dack were folded into the sessions from the outset to ensure best practices were followed, and the Offering's significant sonic tendencies were spotlighted. Grammy Award-winning engineer Alan Duches helmed the mastering of the Seeing the Elephant. In fact, the absolute wilds of Wasp, My Heroine, Ghost Mother and the title track were nurtured and encouraged by the production team. The Offering's artful pulses have never been more dramatic and afire. The one thing I wanted to do differently with this album was to make it feel like a homegrown effort, Nishad says. I roped in one of my best friends for this journey, Zach Weeks of God City Studios, to help me with the engineering. Zach is one of the most intelligent engineers in music right now. Kurt Ballou handpicked him to God City Studios for a reason. He's got an incredible gift and passion for dissecting sounds. I would say that all of my mechanics as a producer came from the things I learned hanging out with him as a teen, so naturally no one understood my engineering language and workflow better than Zach. Having him on the project felt like an extension, a fifth member of The Offering. Okay, so The Offering, I loved their 2019 album. I thought it was fresh, I thought it was unpredictable, very difficult to pigeonhole into a particular genre or even like compare them against other bands. So I was excited to hear what they'd do on this one. And although you can tell it's the same band, they haven't just offered up the same album again.
Oh no.
I know.
Yeah, don't worry, when it gets to me to do the review, you'll all be able to see my elephant.
Oh, Duncan.
Hello.
Looking forward to it. Seeing the Elephant, it still has that like unpredictability factor to it. And in fact, I'd go as far to say as this is even more quirky than Home in certain places, especially kind of vocally, but musically this still has that kind of progressive feel for the most part. But they'll easily like slip into something more kind of metalcore tinged, or even a bit of new metal, or they'll go as heavy as death metal at points, which, you know, they did it on Home as well. They aren't opposed to throwing in a blast beat every now and again, but I mean, even that doesn't really cover all the bases. For people that have heard the singles they've released, although they give you a rough idea of what to expect, they really don't give you the full kind of arsenal of The Offering. They just take you through so many different styles and ideas on this album. I think they've pushed the limits even more on this album than they did on Home. And then, it wasn't like they played it safe on that album. They were still pretty experimental, but on this release, it's definitely a more colourful representation of the band. They've let their personality out on this one, and they've got personality in spades, like both musically and vocally. This is one of those releases that you could identify it instantly as the Offering. Like it has a unique sound to it, and that even filters down to song structures on the album, like kicking off with a 7.5 minute track. Like it's quite a bold choice, when more often than not, like an album opener is usually used to kind of set the tone, but they're not a band that want to kind of conform to the norm. Although these tracks have verses and choruses, there's so many detours that these tracks take, between parts, which you get on that first track, on track 1. And every track kind of has something different, a different twist or a new flavour added in. Track 2, Ghost Mother, has this kind of, it was like trying to put my finger on it, it was like somewhere between like Mudvayne meets El Nino. It's like very kind of like rhythmical and very tribal, but you've got bits of like slapping and popping and stuff. And then Rosefire feels very like uneasy, very chaotic, with the siren going off, and there's this like kind of gothic organ in the background creating this kind of gloomier mood. But then they take you from that chaos into the title track, which is more stripped back and almost like has this kind of carnival feel. Like it reminded me like of a kind of quieter Between the Buried and Me a little bit. And then you've got like the kind of pun infused lyrics on Flower Children, which is inspired by Bruce Cannon Gibney's A Generation of Sociopaths, and that shows a more kind of tongue-in-cheek side to the band as well. But I loved how they kind of followed that up with Tiny Disappointments, which like is way more serious and heartfelt. There's most definitely a lot of thought went into the creation and the kind of arrangement of this album. It has a bit of everything. If you want heavy riffs and grooves, you've got them. If you want hook-laden choruses, they're there. If you want something a bit more quirky and offbeat, like a kind of 12-foot ninja type sound, for example, then they've got you covered. And if you're into kind of technical, more kind of virtuoso playing, then there's plenty of that on here as well. My only kind of criticism of the album was these tracks are so packed with ideas. They take you down so many rabbit holes that at like 51 minutes long, I did feel like this is absolutely kind of bursting at the seams. It wasn't an album where it finished and I was like, I'm going to listen to that again. I was like, I'm going to just take a little break from that. I'll come back to it after I've listened to something else. I needed that little break. So I have that same issue with the other bands as well, but Between the Buried Me is a perfect example of that. I couldn't listen to one of their albums like twice on the bounce either. For some people it won't be an issue. For me, I thought, although the album has a couple of like kind of softer moments like Tipless or the title track, it still felt a little bit overstuffed. There's a lot of like 5, 6, 7 minute tracks on here. Maybe slightly too many personally for me. I think a few of them could have been slightly trimmed just a little bit, made them a little bit more concise. I think they could have still packed in all that personality just with a little bit stripped off at the end, I suppose. But aside from that, the kind of length, I actually really enjoyed it. I think it could be just as good as the last album, which I really enjoyed as well. What about yourself? What did you think of this one?
Sit down and shut up, you ignorant slut. That's what I'm going to say to you. This is fucking great. This is really, 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 really good. So I was not familiar with their previous album, which is a sentence I say a lot. I don't know what I was doing in 2019. Possibly shagging. But I appear to have missed a ton of albums, a ton of debuts as well. What kind of stuck out to me is, have you ever like the first time you ever listened to Bohemian Rhapsody, right? You sit down, you listen to Bohemian Rhapsody, and there's you're about 4 minutes into it, and you're like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Right, and then by the end it all comes back and you're back in the rock world and all the rest. But there's about 2 or 3 movements in that song in particular where you're just like, it kind of almost feels like theatre. And that's what Seeing the Elephant is. It kind of feels like theatre, but done through the prism of metal. I am tired of reading reviews that in the last 3 weeks that keep like patting Slipknot on the back and talking about how brave they were and how experimental. This is the Slipknot album Slipknot should have put out. It's heavier than Slipknot, it's more experimental than Slipknot, but at times very Slipknot. Like very, very Slipknot. So yeah, like this is my big gripe when we were talking about that album on the most recent podcast was everyone's applauding them for changing their sound to a mediocre version of what other bands do really, really, really well.
Yeah.
And the Offering are proof of that positive. This is so vibrant with detail.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much going on, but I never felt overburdened by it. And it's that detail that they put in, whether it's the second time they play through a verse, but they're doing something a little different, a little bit quirky, or those sections where vocally he is switching from the kind of raspy, screamy tones to this kind of smoky melody, which is like hauntingly commercial. Like he's on the cusp of, like, if we just stripped everything out and put like a pop beat in the background, this is selling millions. You know what I mean? And it works so well. At times it almost feels like doing the level of kind of mental gymnastics that the band put you through with the elements they're bringing in, that you should feel like you're overburdened, and I never did. I also think the flow in the album is fucking great. Like, this is another one where all the way through it I felt each track had personality. I didn't feel like we were taking any massive, right turns between tracks. They kind of all went comfortably into each other. Ideas are set up and then further explored. Like the ideas on Seeing the Elephant are kind of further explored on Flower Children in a really interesting way, whether that's by design, but like kind of the scenes they are painting. And they clearly have a very kind of tongue-in-cheek approach to some of their lyrics, but I also think they very much have their finger on the pulse of kind of social morality and social consciousness. There's a lot in here where you can listen to a track like Flower Children and say, well, I don't really think they want to kill an entire generation of old people.
Yeah.
However, they do make a pretty compelling case. Like, they list out a ton of things, and by the end of it, I was kind of marching along with the band. It's it's lyrically very smart, like very, very, very smart. To the point that it's not just playful, and it is playful, but the kind of the melody and the kind of counterpoint melody that he uses in there on certain inflections are really, really, really smart. So I was getting all those elements. It's very well recorded. This album can be heavy as fuck when it wants to. Like, some of those riffs are just huge sounding.
Yeah.
But then you can go to these huge kind of almost proggy clean sections. I'm glad you mentioned Between the Buried and Me, because there are elements of that where they just go off, and it's almost like you're driving your car and then you just decided off-road. And that's kind of how they did. They just veer off, and where are we going now? And I remember when we were reacting to Flower Children, which you can also check on our YouTube page. And then we were, I think, like by the time we went into what could be the second interlude, we were like, what have they got left to give? And that was my concern coming into the listen was, did I just hear all the tricks? Is this the trailer to the action movie that I now no longer need to see because I've seen all the best bits? And it's not at all.
No.
It's not at all. They don't actually ever fully repeat anything on this album. It's in a similar vein, but that's their sound.
Yeah.
Unlike yourself, I wasn't maybe as overcome with it by the end that I kind of felt like I couldn't listen to it again.
Right.
Truth be told, I listened to this 3 times on the trot, then took a day off, and then listened to it again basically on the drive home tonight, getting ready to record this thing with you. So it's nice and fresh in my head. And what was interesting about those repeat back-to-back listens was how much more detail I picked out. Kind of that way where, like, if you watch the movie The Usual Suspects, you get the ending, you're like, oh, I know what the ending is now. Can't wait to watch it again. And then maybe you watch it again, but you kind of remember it, but you're not paying attention. I was hyper focused in on what the guys were doing here, and as such, the second close proximity listen, I was starting to go, oh, actually, that riff's different on the second verse than it was in the first one. I actually really like that because it's kind of playing on that theme. Or actually, vocally, he's doing a lot more than I remembered from that first listen, even though it was only 50 minutes ago. So yeah, I think it's a really rewarding revisit, and there's plenty going on here to keep. Even like, you don't even need to deep dive an album like this to like appreciate it. If you want something heavy, it's full of it. If you want to actually explore what they're doing, you're going to be rewarded as a musician and as a listener. The only track that didn't necessarily work for me is the very last track, Esther Weeks. I know why it's there. I know what it's doing. I like it. It's, you know, got like these huge guitar solos and full of melody and acoustic-y stuff, but I kind of almost felt a little like that track should have been in the middle, and the album should have finished with something like Tiny Disappointments, which I think would be a great closing track, because I think it's a great summation to a lot of the themes that are going on in the album. So I wouldn't chop a song out. I would maybe just reorder it a little bit. Out with that, I think it's a stunning album. I think they should be immensely proud of themselves, and I can't wait. These guys must tour. I can't wait. This would be a fucking feast live. I would love to see it. So yeah, they should feel very proud of what they put together. It's a fucking great album.
Nice. Okay, so scores for The Offering, Seeing the Elephant. I really enjoyed it. I think that the songwriting and the musicianship from these guys is like very high level. I think the guitar playing from Nishad and the Spencer, the bassist, I think is fantastic. Really really interesting to listen to. Really interesting song structures. The way they've arranged the album is fantastic. I agree with you. I think the production's fantastic as well. I personally felt it was a little bit too long. I felt like some of the tracks maybe went on a little bit too long and was a little bit kind of musically exhausting for me. By the time I got to the end, I was like, right, okay, I need a break from that. But that's just me. I would probably go 4 out of 5 on this one. What about yourself?
Marginally higher. I'd give this a 4.5.
4.5 from Duncan. Yes. Nice. So, The Offering, Seeing the Elephant, it drops on November 4th on Century Media Records. I will put some links below to the band's Facebook and to the pre-order for the album. Check it out. Check out the singles. Let us know what you think. Stick some comments in below. That is the review. Thanks for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
We want the boomer dead. Sorry, ma. We want the boomer dead. We want the boomer